I went camping alone in late October of 2022, just a few hours outside of Bend, in a national forest I'd been to once before with friends. I picked that spot because it was remote but still technically legal to camp in, and I figured since it was off-season, I wouldn't run into anyone. The weather forecast said it would drop into the low 30s at night, but I had a decent sleeping bag and enough gear to handle it. I left around noon and reached the trailhead just before sunset. There were only 2 other cars in the lot, both covered in dust like they hadn't moved in days. That didn't bother me at the time. I grabbed my pack, locked my car, and started hiking in. I walked about 2 miles before finding a clearing near a dry creek bed, surrounded by tall pines. It felt quiet in a way that's hard to describe, like the forest was just holding its breath. I set up my tent as the last bit of sunlight faded, ate a quick dinner, and started a small fire. Around 8:30, it was completely dark. No moon, no stars, just thick clouds and the glow of my fire. That's when I heard the first sound. It was faint, like a branch snapping somewhere behind me. I turned around, expecting maybe a deer, but my flashlight didn't catch anything. I told myself it was nothing, just normal forest noise. But then it happened again. This time, it sounded closer, like something stepping on dry leaves just beyond the trees. I stood up and called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded weird out there, like it didn't carry far. No response. I scanned the area again, slower this time, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There was a small, steady light moving between the trees about maybe 50 yards away. Not like a flashlight beam, more like a dim lantern or maybe even a phone screen, but it wasn't steady. It was bobbing slightly, like someone walking. I froze and just watched it. It stopped when I stopped moving. That's what really got to me. I waved my flashlight once, just to see if whoever it was would respond. The light flickered once, then went completely dark. I didn't hear footsteps walking away, no branches snapping, nothing. Just silence again. I stood there for a solid minute, debating what to do. I considered packing up and leaving right then, but the hike back in total darkness didn't feel much safer. So I sat back down by the fire, trying to act like everything was normal, but I kept looking over my shoulder every few seconds. Around 10, the fire had died down to embers, and the cold started creeping in. I got into my tent, zipped it up, and turned off my flashlight. That's when I heard it again, but this time it was unmistakable. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, circling my campsite. They weren't heavy, but they were definitely human. Crunch, pause, crunch. It went on for maybe 20 seconds, then stopped right outside my tent. I could hear breathing. Not loud, but close enough that I knew whoever it was had to be just inches away from the fabric. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. Then, out of nowhere, a voice spoke. It was low, almost whispering, but clear enough that I could make out the words. "I know you're awake." I felt my entire body lock up. I didn't respond. I didn't move. The voice came again, a little closer this time. "You shouldn't be here." Then there was a soft dragging sound, like something being pulled across the ground, followed by slow footsteps walking away into the trees. I stayed completely still for what felt like hours, just listening, waiting for it to come back, but all I heard was the wind picking up through the branches. Eventually, I must have dozed off from exhaustion, because the next thing I remember was waking up to complete silence, and realizing something outside my tent had changed. When I unzipped my tent the next morning, the first thing I noticed was how quiet everything felt. Not just normal early morning quiet, but the kind where even birds don't make a sound. The sky was pale gray, like it had just started to get light, and the air had that damp, freezing feeling that makes your hands stiff almost instantly. I sat there for a second, replaying what happened the night before, trying to convince myself it had been a dream. But as soon as I looked down at the ground outside my tent, I knew it wasn't. There were footprints all around my campsite. Not animal tracks, actual shoe prints, clear as day in the dirt and scattered pine needles. They circled my tent multiple times, overlapping in some places, like whoever made them had been pacing. I climbed out slowly, scanning the trees, half expecting to see someone just standing there watching me. But there was nothing. No movement, no sound, just those tracks and the cold air pressing in from all sides. I followed them for a few steps, and that's when I noticed something else. About 10 feet from my tent, near where my fire had been, there was a long, thin line in the dirt, like something had been dragged in a straight path. It led away from my campsite and disappeared into the trees. I didn't like the idea of following it, but I also couldn't ignore it. I grabbed my flashlight and walked a little closer, keeping my distance from the tree line. The drag mark went on for maybe 20 yards before stopping abruptly at the base of a large pine. That's where I saw it. A piece of dark fabric, caught on a low branch, swaying slightly in the wind. It looked torn, like it had been ripped from a jacket or something. I didn't touch it. I just stood there, trying to make sense of why someone would be out here, in the middle of nowhere, dragging something through the forest in the middle of the night. My first thought was maybe another camper messing with me, but the tone of that voice didn't feel like a joke. And the way those footsteps circled my tent, it didn't feel random. It felt intentional. I decided pretty quickly that I wasn't staying another night. I packed up my gear faster than I ever had before, barely even bothering to eat. Every few seconds, I'd stop and listen, convinced I was going to hear those footsteps again. But the forest stayed completely still. By the time I started hiking back toward the trailhead, the sun was just beginning to break through the clouds, casting that dull, gray light over everything. I kept looking behind me as I walked, checking the trees, the path, anything that could hide a person. About halfway back, I noticed something that made my stomach sink all over again. There were fresh footprints on the trail ahead of me. Same size, same pattern as the ones around my tent. And they were heading in the same direction I was. For a second, I thought maybe they were mine from the night before, but that didn't make sense. I hadn't walked this path since coming in, and these prints were too defined, like they'd been made recently. I slowed down, my mind racing, trying to figure out if someone could have left before me and just happened to take the same trail. But then I noticed the spacing. The stride was shorter than mine, more deliberate. And every so often, the prints would veer slightly off the path, like whoever made them was stopping to look into the trees. Or maybe hide. I didn't like that thought, so I picked up my pace, trying to put as much distance between me and whatever this was. The trail curved ahead, and for a moment, I lost sight of the footprints. But when I rounded the bend, I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. About 30 yards ahead, partially obscured by the trees, there was a figure standing just off the trail. I couldn't make out any details, just a dark shape, perfectly still, facing in my direction. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. We just stood there like that for a few seconds, either of us moving. Then, slowly, the figure stepped back behind a tree and disappeared. I didn't wait to see if they'd come back out. I turned and started walking faster, almost jogging at that point, my eyes darting between the trail ahead and the woods around me. Every sound felt amplified, the crunch of my boots, the rustling of branches, even my own breathing. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me, matching my pace. But there was nothing. After what felt like forever, I finally reached the trailhead. The parking lot looked exactly the same as the day before. My car was still there, along with the 2 dusty vehicles. I unlocked my door, threw my gear in the back, and got inside as quickly as I could. Before starting the engine, I glanced at the other cars. One of them, an old pickup truck, had a thin layer of frost on the windows, except for a small patch on the driver's side where it looked like someone had recently wiped it clear. And as I stared at it, trying to process what I was seeing, I realized something that made my hands start shaking all over again. That truck hadn't been empty after all. I sat there in my car for a few seconds, just staring at that cleared patch on the truck's window, trying to convince myself there was a normal explanation for it. Maybe someone had come back early that morning, maybe they were still inside, sleeping. But the more I looked at it, the less that made sense. The rest of the windshield was completely frosted over, thick enough that you couldn't see through it at all, but that one spot, about the size of a hand, was perfectly clear, like someone had wiped it from the inside. And it was positioned at eye level, angled directly toward where I had parked. Toward me. I quickly looked away, suddenly feeling exposed just sitting there. I reached over, locked my doors, and started the engine. The sound felt way too loud in that quiet lot. As the car warmed up, I couldn't stop myself from glancing back at the truck. Nothing moved. No door opened, no figure stepped out. It just sat there, silent and still. After about 30 seconds, I put the car in reverse and backed out of the space. The second I started to turn toward the exit, something shifted in that clear patch of glass. It was subtle, but I saw it. A shape. Like someone leaning closer to the window from the inside. I didn't wait to confirm it. I slammed on the gas and drove out of that lot faster than I probably should have, gravel kicking up behind me as I hit the main road. I didn't slow down until I was at least 10 minutes away, and even then, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that truck following me. But the road stayed empty. No headlights, no movement, just a long stretch of quiet highway cutting through the forest. Eventually, I reached a small gas station on the edge of town. It was the kind of place with one pump island and a tiny store attached, lights buzzing faintly overhead. I pulled in, parked, and just sat there for a minute, trying to calm down. My hands were still shaking, and my mind kept replaying everything: the footsteps, the voice, the figure on the trail, that window. After a while, I went inside and grabbed a bottle of water, mostly just to have an excuse to be around other people. There was a guy behind the counter, maybe in his 50s, reading a newspaper. He looked up as I walked in, gave me a quick nod, then went back to what he was doing. I hesitated for a second, then asked him if he knew anything about people camping out in the forest nearby. He looked up again, this time a little more focused. "Which area?" he asked. I told him roughly where I had been, near the trailhead I parked at. His expression changed almost immediately. Not shocked, just concerned. He folded the paper slowly and set it aside. "You camped there last night?" he asked. I nodded. There was a brief pause before he spoke again. "You alone?" I said yes, and he let out a quiet breath, like he was thinking about how to respond. Then he leaned forward slightly and said, "You shouldn't go out there by yourself. Not in that spot." I asked him why, expecting maybe a story about wildlife or something, but that's not what he said. He told me that over the past year or so, there had been a few reports from people who camped in that area. Nothing official, nothing the police really followed up on, but similar kinds of things. People hearing footsteps around their tents at night, seeing lights moving through the trees, feeling like they were being watched. A couple of them even mentioned someone speaking to them from outside their tent. My stomach dropped as he said that. I asked if anyone had ever actually seen who it was. He shook his head. "Not clearly," he said. "But one guy said he saw someone standing just off the trail, watching him. Said they didn't move until he did." That matched exactly what I had experienced. I told him about the truck in the parking lot, about the window. He went quiet for a moment, then asked me what kind of truck it was. I described it as best as I could: older model, dark color, kinda beat up. He nodded slowly, like he recognized it. Then he said something that made everything feel even worse. "That truck's been sitting out there for weeks," he said. "No one's supposed to be using it." I felt this cold wave run through me, the kind that makes your chest feel tight. I asked him if he was sure, and he just shrugged slightly. "People around here notice things like that," he said. "It doesn't belong to anyone local." I didn't